The wind howled through the trees of Morningside Park. It was a chilly morning in October 1948, just before 6 o'clock a.m. A delivery driver, taking a shortcut through the grass, noticed something strange hanging from a large elm tree near the south exit. He thought it was a scarecrow or a prank, but when he walked closer, the color drained from his face. He didn't scream, he just ran. Detectives Frank Miller and James O'Shea were the first officers on the scene. Miller stopped dead in his tracks. The sight was enough to turn his stomach. This wasn't just a killing, it was a warning sign. A young man, barely 21 years old, was suspended from a thick branch. The angle of his neck told a gruesome story of a slow, agonizing end. He wore a crisp City College blazer and gray slacks, but his feet were bare. His hands were raw, showing he had fought hard for his life against a group much stronger than him. Pinned to his shirt was a piece of cardboard with a message scrawled in black marker: "Stay where you belong." Miller scanned the empty park. The body was positioned so that anyone walking to the subway would see it. The killers wanted an audience. They wanted fear to grip every heart in Harlem. O'Shea reached into the boy's pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open to check the ID. "Julian Johnson," he read aloud. Then he froze. He looked at Miller, his eyes wide with sudden realization. "Johnson? Not that family." "Check the address," Miller snapped. "It matches," O'Shea whispered. "This is Bumpy Johnson's nephew." A heavy silence fell over the two policemen. They knew exactly what this meant. This wasn't just a murder case anymore. It was a declaration of war. "What are we putting in the log?" O'Shea asked, his voice shaking. Miller looked at the battered body of the young student. He thought about the justice system, about the judges and juries who would never convict a group of white men for killing a black kid in 1948. If they investigated this, it would go nowhere. But if the streets found out? "Suicide," Miller said, his voice flat. "Suicide?" O'Shea looked at the obvious signs of a struggle. "Frank, look at him." "We write it up as a suicide," Miller insisted, turning away. "We notify the family, and we walk away. Those men who did this, they're already dead. They just don't know it yet. Let Bumpy handle it." They cut Julian down and sent him to the morgue, marking the death as self-inflicted. They hoped it would keep the peace, but they knew a hurricane was coming. Julian Johnson was a bright kid. He was studying political science at City College and dreamed of becoming a judge. He wanted to fix the system from the inside. He lived with his mother, Sarah, who was Bumpy Johnson's beloved older sister. Every Sunday, Julian took the path through Morningside Park to get to the early service at the local chapel. Someone had been tracking his routine. The hate group responsible wasn't some distant clan from the Deep South. They were right here in the city. A secret circle of 12 men met in the basement of a butcher shop on 110th Street. By day, they were neighbors, postmen, and mechanics. By night, they wore their hatred like a badge of honor. On a rainy night in September, they had cut a deck of cards to decide who would carry out their sick plan. They wanted to send a message that no one was safe, no matter how smart or successful they were. 5 men pulled the high cards: Arthur Stone, Bill Davis, Pete Miller, Sam O'Reilly, and George Vance. They thought they were teaching Harlem a lesson. They had no idea they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They went after Julian because he was the very thing they feared: smart, educated, and rising up in the world. On that chilly morning of October 17th, 1948, the 5 men hid in the bushes of Morningside Park. At 6:10 a.m., Julian entered the park path, clutching his political science textbooks to his chest. He never made it to the chapel. The men stepped out from the shadows. They didn't wear masks or hoods. They wanted him to see their faces. This wasn't a warning, it was a slaughter. Julian tried to bolt, making it a few yards before they tackled him to the cold ground. He was slim, barely 150 pounds, but he fought with the heart of a lion. His glasses shattered on the pavement. his books scattered into the wet grass. But 5 heavy men held him down. Arthur Stone pulled a thick coil of rope from his jacket, the same rope he had prepared days ago. Julian was sobbing. "Please, I didn't do anything wrong. Let me go." Sam O'Reilly froze. For a second, he looked at the terrified boy and felt a sick feeling in his gut. This wasn't a faceless enemy. This was someone's child. But Arthur threw the rope over the sturdy elm branch, cinched the loop around Julian's neck, and hauled him up. The other men helped. Julian's feet kicked at the air. He gasped and clawed frantically at the rope, tearing his own skin in a desperate attempt to breathe. It took 5 agonizing minutes. 5 minutes of suffering while the men stood back and watched. When Julian finally hung still, they pinned the cardboard sign to his shirt, "Stay where you belong." Then they dusted off their hands and went home to their families, certain that the police would ignore it, thinking Julian was just another statistic. They had no idea they had just started a war. Bumpy Johnson's phone rang at 7:30 a.m. His lieutenant, a man known as Chicago, was on the line, his voice cracking. "Boss, it's bad. It's Julian, Sarah's boy. They found him in the park. Hez dead." Bumpy couldn't speak. The phone felt like a brick in his hand. "Boss, the cops are writing it up as a suicide." But there was a note. It was a hate group. Bumpy hung up the phone gently. He sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the wall. He saw flashes of the past, teaching Julian how to tie a tie, watching him graduate, seeing the pride on his sister Sarah's face when Julian got into college. Finally, Bumpy stood up and grabbed his long coat. "I'm going to Sarah's." Sarah lived a few blocks away. When Bumpy walked in, the living room was full of neighbors trying to help. Sarah sat in the middle, looking like her world had ended. "They killed my baby," she screamed when she saw her brother. Bumpy sat down and pulled her into a hug. "I know. The police said he did it to himself. My Julian loved life. He would never." "It wasn't suicide," Bumpy said, his voice low and cold. "It was murder. 5 men." Sarah shook with grief. Bumpy held her tight, feeling a rare sense of helplessness. He ran the streets, but he hadn't been able to save his own blood. But as he held his sister, the sadness turned into ice-cold rage. "I will take care of this," Bumpy whispered. "Take care of it?" Sarah looked at him with hollow eyes. "Will it bring my boy back?" "No, but it is justice. It means no other mother has to go through this because of those cowards." Sarah wiped her tears and looked him in the eye. "Then do it. But Bumpy, make them understand. Make them feel exactly what I am feeling right now." "I promise you," Bumpy said. "They will know." By 9:30 a.m., Bumpy was standing beneath the elm tree in Morningside Park. The police had taken Julian's body away and cut down the rope. But they were sloppy. They missed the small details. Bumpy noticed what they left behind. 5 cigar stubs stamped into the dirt. 5 sets of heavy boot prints, the kind worn by dock workers or construction crews. A piece of blue denim fabric torn on a jagged piece of bark. And a matchbook, half buried in the mud, from O'Malley's Pub on 105th Street, right on the edge of the neighborhood. Bumpy gathered every piece of evidence. Then he swept the perimeter of the park, looking for eyes. Near the east gate, he found Henry, an old homeless man who slept under the bushes. Most people walked right past Henry like he was invisible. Bumpy sat down beside him. "Henry." The old man jumped. "Mr. Johnson, I don't want any trouble." "No trouble," Bumpy said softly. "Just cash and safety. Tell me what you saw." Henry looked around nervously, then whispered. 5 white men. They were here before the sun came up. I heard them laughing about teaching a lesson. They were waiting by that tree. Did you hear any names?" "Just one. The big guy with the scar. The others called him Arthur. They said they were heading to O'Malley's to celebrate." Bumpy pressed $300 into Henry's dirty hand. "You never saw a thing. Go get a warm room." Henry nodded and vanished into the city streets. Bumpy went back to his headquarters and dialed a number. Mickey, a bouncer at O'Malley's, picked up. He owed Bumpy his life. "Mickey, a group of 5 men. Did they come in early this morning? Loud? Drunk?" Mickey paused. "Yeah, boss. They walked in at 7 a.m. like they own the place, bragging about handling business. I need names. Arthur Stone, Bill Davis, Pete Miller, Sam O'Reilly, and George Vance. They're regulars. They meet in the back room every other Friday. Some sort of patriot club. But between you and me, they wear hoods." Bumpy thanked him and hung up. By 8 p.m. on the second day, Bumpy had files on all 5 targets. He knew where they slept, where they worked, and who they loved. He called his top enforcers into the room: Chicago, Red Big Tiny, and Silas. These men were loyal to the bone. 5 names, Bumpy said, his voice like cold steel. They killed Julian. Now, they pay the price. 7 days, 5 men. They need to understand what it feels like to lose everything. He handed out the dossiers. "When we are done with the 5 of them, we burn their whole organization down. We show them that Harlem isn't afraid." The men nodded. They had known Julian since he was a baby. This was personal. "And take pictures," Bumpy added. "I want proof. If anyone asks why we did this, I want to show them the fear in their eyes." Arthur Stone was a mechanic in Queens. He lived above a dusty garage. On October 19th at 9 p.m., Arthur was downstairs fixing a carburetor when the lights suddenly cut out. He froze. 3 men stepped out of the shadows. Arthur didn't even have time to shout. They moved with military precision. One hand clamped over his mouth. Another twisted his arm until it popped. Arthur was a big guy, but he was helpless against Bumpy's crew. They tied his hands with thick wire. Chicago threw a rope over the steel beam of the garage ceiling. Arthur's eyes went wide with terror. He knew exactly what was happening. He tried to beg through the gag, shaking his head wildly. Chicago stared at him with zero emotion. "You remember the boy? You remember Julian?" They slipped the noose around Arthur's neck and hoisted him up. They didn't kill him instantly. They let him dangle, let him kick and thrash, let him feel the rope biting into his skin. They made him feel every ounce of the panic that Julian had felt in the park. After 30 seconds, the men lowered Arthur Stone. He gasped for air, tears streaming down his face, thinking the nightmare was over. But they hauled him up again. They did this 3 times, choking him, letting him dangle until he was on the verge of blacking out, then dropping him just enough to breathe. They were teaching him exactly what Julian had felt in those final moments. On the 4th lift, they tied the rope off and left him there. They set up a camera on a tripod to capture the scene, proof that the debt was paid. When Arthur's wife discovered him the next evening, he was gone. A note was pinned to his grease-stained shirt. 1 down, 4 to go. You wanted to know your place? Now you found it. Harlem never forgets. Bill Davis grew paranoid after hearing about Arthur. He installed new locks and checked over his shoulder constantly. But he still had to earn a living at the factory. On October 20th, Bill returned home at 5:45 p.m. and went straight to his backyard workshop to fix a lawnmower. He didn't realize someone had been there before him. He missed the faint scent of fuel. He didn't check the side window, which had been screwed shut from the outside. Bill tinkered for 20 minutes before he heard a noise. He spun around and saw a puddle of liquid creeping across the floor. A gas can lay on its side. He hadn't knocked it over. Realization hit him hard. He rushed to the door, but the handle wouldn't turn. It was jammed tight. He ran to the window, clawing at it, but it was sealed. Panic set in. He grabbed a hammer and started smashing the door. Then a lit match slid through the gap under the door. Bill screamed, but it was too late. The fumes ignited. The shed turned into an inferno. Bill threw his body against the door. smashing through the rotten wood on the third try. He tumbled onto the grass, engulfed in flames. Neighbors rushed over with garden hoses and blankets, saving his life, but just barely. Bill suffered burns over 65% of his body. His face was melted. He would spend the next year in a burn unit, and the rest of his life in agony, a monster to anyone who looked at him. Firefighters found a note on the fence, untouched by the heat. 2 down, 3 to go. You like burning crosses? Now you know how the fire bites. Pete Miller was an avid hunter. After the news about Arthur and Bill spread, he told his wife he needed to clear his head in the mountains. He thought he was escaping. He didn't know that Silas and Big Tiny had been tracking him for 2 days. On October 21st, Pete drove deep into the Catskills and hiked miles into the forest. An hour in, the noises began. Snap of a twig, rustle of leaves, always behind him. Pete turned, but saw only trees. He sped up. The footsteps sped up. A voice echoed through the pines, seemingly coming from the ground itself. Pete Miller, it whispered. You helped kill Julian. Pete bolted, sprinting off the trail into the dense brush. For 3 days and nights, he ran. Bumpy's men stalked him like a wounded deer. They never let him sleep. Every time his eyes closed, they made a noise. Every time he stopped to drink, a rock would hit the water. By the 3rd day, Pete was broken. He was sobbing, hugging birch trees, begging ghosts for mercy. Rescuers found him on October 24th, wandering in circles, physically unharmed, but mentally shattered. He was committed to an asylum, screaming about voices in the woods. In his pocket, they found a crumpled paper. 3 down, 2 to go. You hunted a boy for sport. Now you know what it feels like to be the prey. Sam O'Reilly was shaking with fear. 3 of his crew were taken out in less than a week. He packed up his family and checked into a motel in Jersey, thinking distance would save them. But Chicago had been tailing Sam for days. He knew exactly which room they were in, and more importantly, he knew Sam's house in Queens was empty. On October 22nd at 2:30 a.m., Sam's empty home erupted in flames. Gasoline had been soaked into the porch, and windows were smashed to feed the fire. When the smoke cleared, Sam O'Reilly's home was nothing but charcoal. Every photo album, every piece of furniture, his wife's jewelry box, all gone. The fire chief met Sam at the motel where he was hiding. Mr. O'Reilly, I'm sorry. It's a total loss. And listen, this wasn't bad wiring. This was arson. Pros did this. Sam didn't say a word. He just nodded. He expected it. On the charred remains of his mailbox, a note was taped. 4 down, 1 to go. You ruined a family. Now you know what it means to lose everything. George Vance was the last man standing. He had watched 4 of his friends get taken out in less than a week. He knew in his bones that tonight was his turn. At 5 a.m. on October 23rd, George made a choice. He would go to the cops. He would confess to the murder. Prison had to be safer than the streets of New York. He got into a sedan and started driving toward the precinct on 125th Street. He was so panicked, he didn't see the car trailing him. He didn't notice when it cut him off on a quiet side street just blocks from the station. Chicago stepped out of the vehicle and tapped on George's window. George looked up, saw the cold look in Chicago's eyes, and felt his stomach drop. Step out of the car, George. Please, I'm going to turn myself in. I'll tell them everything. Get out. George stepped onto the pavement, his knees knocking together. I was going to the police, he stammered. You were running, Chicago said, his voice flat. Like a rat. I'm sorry. God, I didn't want to do it. Arthur made us. Arthur is dead. I know. Please, just let me go. I'll move to the West Coast. You'll never see me again. Chicago reached into his jacket and pulled out a photo. It was Julian, smiling in his graduation gown. His name was Julian. He was barely 20. He wanted to fix the law. And you wrapped a rope around his neck and squeezed. George broke down sobbing. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't make him breathe again." Chicago stepped closer, invading George's space. "Here is how this ends. You aren't going to jail. You aren't running to California. You are going to that butcher shop on 110th Street. What? No, I can't go there. You will, because you are the messenger. Tonight at 9 p.m., I want every member of your little hate club in that basement. You are going to take a vote." "A vote?" "That's right. You vote to pack your bags and leave this city forever, or you stay. If you vote to stay, we burn that building down with every single one of you inside. And the police? They'll call it an accident, just like they called Julian's murder a suicide." Chicago shoved the photo back into his coat. "You have one option, George. Convince your boys to break up the club or burn with them. There is no third door." Chicago got back into his sedan and peeled away. George stood frozen on the sidewalk for 10 minutes, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then he got back in his car and drove to the butcher shop. At 9 p.m. on October 23rd, 12 men gathered in the damp basement on 110th Street. The entire local chapter was there. George, sweating and pale, told them everything. He told them about Arthur hanging in the garage, about Bill screaming in the fire, about Pete losing his mind in the woods, and Sam's life turning to ash. "They gave us a choice," George said, his voice cracking. "We shut this down tonight. We leave New York, or they burn this building down with us inside." A few of the men laughed. "One colored gangster is threatening 12 of us?" the leader sneered. "He's bluffing." Others weren't so sure. "4 of our top guys were taken out in a week," one man whispered. "Maybe we should. Maybe we should go." "Go where?" the leader shouted. "Run away? We are patriots. We don't run." The argument got loud. Shouting filled the small room. Finally, they took a vote. 8 voted to stay and fight. 4, including George, voted to run. The 4 men who voted to leave didn't waste a second. They bolted for the door. "You're making a mistake, George," the leader called out. "If they come, we'll be ready." "Let them come," George muttered. He ran to his car and drove straight to the Port Authority bus terminal. He never looked back. Across the street, hidden in the shadows of an alley, Bumpy Johnson and his crew watched the exit. They counted. 12 went in. 4 came out. 8 stayed, Chicago whispered. Bumpy nodded slowly. Then, 8 burned. At midnight, the attack began. Red and Big Tiny moved to the sides of the building. Each carried a crate of Molotov cocktails. Silas took the back exit. Chicago secured the front. Bumpy stood across the street, his face like stone. At 12:02 a.m., the first bottle crashed through a basement window. Then another, and another. 6 bottles of gasoline and fire turned the basement into an oven instantly. The building erupted. The men inside started screaming, rushing for the stairs. But the heavy front door wouldn't budge. Chicago had padlocked it from the outside while they were arguing. The back door flew open. 2 men stumbled out, their clothes smoking, coughing up black soot. Silas stepped aside and let them run. They were burned, terrified, and broken. That was enough punishment for them. 6 men died in that basement, trapped by the flames. The fire department's official report called it an unfortunate accident, citing a gas leak and stored chemicals. The police investigation was closed in 2 days. No suspects, no arrests. Detective Miller filed the paperwork and never spoke of it again. By October 25th, the hate group in Harlem was extinct. 5 men had killed Julian Johnson. Arthur Stone was dead. Bill Davis was a burn victim, his life over. Pete Miller was in an asylum. Sam O'Reilly was homeless. George Vance was gone. 6 more men who wanted to fight died in the fire. The remaining members in the city, the ones who had skipped the meeting, burned their white hoods, destroyed their membership lists, and vanished into the woodwork. The message had been delivered loud and clear. Harlem protects its own. If you touch our children, you lose everything. Over 3,500 people packed the streets for Julian Johnson's funeral. The casket was closed. Sarah had insisted on it. She wanted the world to remember Julian as he was, bright, smiling, and full of life. Bumpy stood next to his sister the entire time. He didn't say a word, but his eyes held a weight that no one else could understand. As the casket was lowered into the earth, Bumpy stepped forward. He placed a thick envelope on top of the wood. Inside was a photo of Julian holding his diploma, and 5 other pictures: Arthur hanging, Bill's ruined face, Pete being dragged from the woods, Sam's burned house, and the butcher shop in flames. On the back of the envelope, Bumpy had written a note: "Julian, the debt is paid. All of them. Every man who touched you. Every man who cheered them on." Harlem brought the gavel down. "Rest easy, nephew. Your mother is safe. Your streets are safe. I promise, Uncle Bumpy." Sarah saw the envelope. She placed her hand on Bumpy's arm. "Is it finished?" "It is finished." Did they understand? Did they feel what I felt? Bumpy looked at his sister, his expression softening. Every single one of them knows what loss feels like now. They know pain. They know what it means to have their world stolen. Sarah nodded, a single tear falling. "Good." She dropped a white rose onto the casket. "My baby wanted to be a judge. He wanted to fight the bad guys in court." "I know," Bumpy said, "but the court failed him. The police failed him. The law failed him." Sarah squeezed his hand. "So you became the law?" "Yes, thank you." They stood shoulder to shoulder as the wooden box vanished into the dirt. More than 3,500 souls from the neighborhood came to say farewell to the young man who would never get to hold a gavel, whose future had been snatched away in the dark. In 1965, 17 years after the smoke cleared, a journalist finally got Bumpy Johnson to sit down. "Mr. Johnson," he asked, "people still whisper about what happened to those 12 men in October of 1948. They say you were the one who gave the order. Do you have a comment?" Bumpy was in his 60s now. His hair was gray, but his eyes were still sharp as a razor. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying the weight of a city. "My nephew wanted to be a judge," Bumpy said softly. "He believed in the rules. He believed in the court system. And me? I believed in it too. Until the police looked at a lynched boy and wrote suicide on the paper. Until they filed the case in a drawer and went to lunch. Until the system Julian loved spit in his face." "So you became the judge and jury?" the reporter pressed. "I didn't take anything that wasn't owed," Bumpy replied, his voice hardening. "The courts refused to deliver the mail, so I had to deliver it myself." "But doesn't that make you just as bad as them?" "As who?" Bumpy snapped. "As the men who murdered a bright kid just for being black? As the cops who covered it up? As a government that has failed us since the beginning?" The reporter went silent. "You want to ask if I feel guilty?" Bumpy leaned forward. "I regret that we had to do it. I regret that in 1948, after fighting a war for freedom overseas, we still had to fight monsters in our own backyard. I regret that Julian died thinking the law would protect him. But the men who died, they got exactly what they bought. They took a life, so their lives were taken. They burned a future, so their futures burned. That isn't revenge, son. That is just math." Bumpy stood up to leave. The interview was over. "Write this down," he said at the door. After October 1948, that hate group never showed its face in Harlem again. Not once in 17 years. You know why? Because bullies only stop when they know they will get punched back. That wasn't me being a gangster. That was me doing the job the police wouldn't do. The interview never made the papers, but the streets never forgot. The lesson passed from father to son like a legend. If you touch a child in Harlem, Harlem will reach out and touch you back. And it won't be with a lawsuit. It will be with something permanent. Julian Johnson wanted to be the law. Instead, his uncle became the executioner. 7 days, a dozen men removed, and a silence that lasted for decades. Harlem looks out for Harlem. If this story made you question the difference between law and justice, smash that subscribe button. We aren't here to praise violence. We are here to tell the raw history of how a community survived when the world turned its back. Let us know in the comments, was Bumpy a hero or a villain? When the system is broken, is it wrong to fix it yourself? Where do you draw the line? Turn on those notifications. We have more Untold files on Bumpy Johnson coming soon.